Caitlin Clark out for the remainder of the 2025 season, something we all think we knew was coming after what Stephanie White said earlier today. We couldn't be too sure until we see it.
The WNBA, Caitlin Clark is no longer going to play this season. The WNBA and the Indiana Fever.
The WNBA is spiraling into chaos, and it all comes down to one player, Caitlin Clark, the generational superstar who carried the league on her back, and now she's officially done for the season. And this isn't just another injury headline. This is the collapse of an entire business model built around her name. Because we're not just talking about the Indiana Fever, we're talking about Stephanie White, Amber Cox, Kathy Engelbert, Adam Silver, every single executive tied to this league now under fire. Because they watched as Clark was hammered night after night, fouled without calls, shoved, targeted, her body breaking down piece by piece until she could no longer stand, and fans saw it with their own eyes. They saw the whistles swallowed, the hits ignored, the laughter from opponents as Clark was left unprotected, and now the result is catastrophic. Fans are furious, demanding answers, refunds, even boycotts, while the commissioner stays silent. And the question tearing across social media is simple. How could the WNBA allow its brightest star, the very player who sold out arenas and skyrocketed television ratings, to crumble in just 13 games? And what happens now that the golden goose of women's basketball is gone, leaving the entire season hanging by a thread? It all started back in her rookie season when Caitlin Clark instantly became the most targeted player in the league, receiving nearly 20% of all flagrant fouls called across the WNBA, and the majority of those came at the hands of Angel Reese and the Chicago Sky. And these weren't just hard basketball plays, these were blatant, excessive hits designed to send a message. Clark getting shoved, grabbed, knocked to the floor, and instead of punishment, the response was laughter. Opponents standing over her, mocking her pain, laughing at the face of the league as if injuring her was part of the game. And fans were outraged because they could see it clear as day. This wasn't competition. It was assault on the hardwood, and in any other workplace, what Clark endured would have landed someone in jail. Yet, in the WNBA, it was treated as business as usual, and that culture of indifference set the stage for everything that would follow. A pattern of targeting, mocking, and abuse that snowballed into the very disaster we're witnessing right now. And what makes this disaster even worse is that it wasn't some isolated play or a one-off bad night. It became a clear, undeniable pattern game after game, possession after possession, the entire league. Taking liberties with Caitlin Clark while referees stood silent. She was double-teamed before even touching the ball, shoved into defenders, knocked off balance, stripped of space to move, and instead of blowing the whistle, the officials just let it happen. Until even major outlets like the Washington Post were forced to call it out, labeling the obvious targeting that fans in every arena could see with their own eyes. And the humiliation piled on because it wasn't just the fouls, it was the laughter, opponents hitting her hard, then standing over her, mocking her as Angel Reese, and the Chicago Sky led the charge with plays that didn't even resemble basketball. Clark getting hammered and players grinning while the referees swallowed their whistles, and fans were left asking how the league could allow the most valuable player in women's basketball to be turned into a punching bag, traveling city to city to sell out arenas while being left completely unprotected on the court. And the scary part is, it didn't stop there, because by this season, Caitlin Clark wasn't the only one taking the punishment. Sophie Cunningham stepped right into the same fire, and suddenly she's absorbing more flagrant fouls than almost anyone in the league except Clark and Aaliyah Boston. And fans could see the pattern clear as day. It wasn't just the occasional hard play. It was a nightly routine of cheap shots, jersey grabs, body checks, and somehow not even common fouls were being called. And that wasn't just frustrating, it was dangerous. Because those constant uncalled hits add up. They grind on already strained muscles until the body finally gives out. And that's exactly how Clark's quad tightened up in May, how her groin burned through June, and how her season finally collapsed in July. None of it a mystery, all of it predictable. Because the league chose ticket sales, television deals, and sponsorships over protecting their stars. forcing Clark and Cunningham to play through relentless contact just to keep arenas full, and fans called it what it was: pure hypocrisy, because the WNBA was happy to profit off Clark's name while refusing to give her the basic protection every other superstar in sports automatically gets. The hypocrisy couldn't be clearer, because on one side, the WNBA bragged about record ticket sales, sold-out merchandise, and massive new sponsorships, all built on Caitlin Clark's shoulders. But on the other side, they treated her like just another rookie, leaving her to get hammered possession after possession without the simplest protection, and the result wasn't just unfair games. It was a season slowly turning into a ticking time bomb that everyone could see coming, because when your brightest star is being battered every night and refs refuse to blow the whistle, you're not just risking a single injury, you're risking the future of the entire league. And fans felt the betrayal deep in their bones. They saw Clark selling out NBA-sized arenas in New York, Chicago, and Las Vegas. They saw her become the literal engine of growth. And yet, night after night, she was denied the superstar whistles every other league grants its stars automatically. Instead, defenders hand-checked her out of space, cut off her movement before plays could begin, and what should have been the golden era of women's basketball turned into a slow-motion collapse caused by negligence, greed, and a complete refusal to protect the very player who gave the league relevance. Caitlin Clark's game was unlike anything the WNBA had ever seen, and that's exactly why this collapse cut so deep, because her style wasn't just good basketball, it was electric, it was magnetic, it was the kind of game that made every possession feel like a highlight reel. With the deep range of Steph Curry, the confidence of Kobe Bryant, and the flair that drew in millions of fans far outside the traditional women's basketball base, she was the perfect storm of skill, personality, and showmanship. And that's why her absence isn't just a setback, it's a full-blown collapse. Because the league desperately needed her to keep casual fans hooked, to keep networks invested, to keep arenas packed, and instead they left her mocked, targeted, and unprotected until her body finally gave out. And now, the one player who single-handedly pushed the sport into mainstream conversation is sidelined, leaving fans angry, betrayed, and convinced that the WNBA doesn't know how to protect its most valuable investment. What makes this collapse even more infuriating is that it wasn't some freak accident, it was the direct result of negligence. Because night after night, the referees allowed Clark to be hacked, shoved, and battered without consequence, and those no calls piled up until her body simply couldn't take it anymore. The proof was right in front of everyone's eyes. She grimaced through cuts that came up short. She lost the explosive first step that made her drives unstoppable. She was clearly laboring, but instead of protecting her, the league doubled down, forcing her into back-to-back games, relentless travel, and heavy minutes just to keep ticket sales alive. And in the end, that greed guaranteed the worst-case scenario, Clark's season-ending collapse, and the blame can't be hidden behind bad luck or timing, because this wasn't random. This was a ticking time bomb the WNBA ignored until it exploded. And now, the league has to face the truth that by valuing short-term profit over player safety, they destroyed the trust of the fans and left their golden star broken on the sideline. When the moment finally came for the league to respond, fans expected accountability, leadership, honesty. But instead, what they got from Commissioner Kathy Engelbert was a hollow, polished statement that sounded more like a corporate press release than a human response. She talked about growth and expansion while completely ignoring the obvious reality that Clark had been targeted every single night, that referees failed to do their jobs, and that the league's refusal to step in directly contributed to her collapse. And that silence on the real issues was deafening, because fans weren't asking for vague optimism, they were demanding answers. They wanted the league to admit failure and promise change. They wanted to hear the words, "We failed and we will fix this." But instead, they got revenue talk, ticket sales, talk expansion talk, and in that moment, it became painfully clear the WNBA cared more about its image than the health of the player who built that image. And that disconnect lit a firestorm of outrage that spread far beyond basketball, leaving Engelbert herself as the face of a league completely out of touch with its fans. The backlash was instant and brutal because fans weren't just disappointed anymore, they were furious. Ticket prices that once skyrocketed collapsed on the resale market. Arenas that had been packed just weeks earlier sat half empty, and the All-Star Weekend in Indiana that was supposed to be Caitlin Clark's grand showcase turned into a hollow event filled with angry fans demanding refunds. Television networks that bet primetime slots on Clark's star power were left watching ratings crash, and sponsors who poured millions into the so-called Clark effect suddenly found themselves tied to games nobody wanted to watch, and the frustration over injuries quickly exploded into a full-blown movement. As fans organized boycotts, canceled tickets, and flooded social media with outrage, because they realized they weren't just being sold basketball, they were being sold false hope, strung along by day-to-day injury labels that insiders already knew were lies. And in just a matter of weeks, the trust that took one rookie season to build evaporated, leaving the WNBA facing a financial and reputational disaster of its own, making all because it refused to protect the one player who carried the sport. And now, the WNBA is left staring at the wreckage of its own failures because Caitlin Clark's season didn't end by chance. It ended because the league refused to protect her, refused to call fouls, refused to put her health above profit, and in doing so, they broke the trust of the very fans who kept them alive. And that kind of damage is harder to repair than any injury, because once fans see that money matters more than player safety, the credibility of the league collapses. And no marketing campaign can bring it back. Fans aren't asking for hype anymore. They want accountability. They want referees held responsible. They want leadership that protects its stars instead of selling them out. And until that happens, boycotts will grow louder, ratings will keep falling, and the foundation of the league will continue to crumble. Caitlin Clark will recover, she will return stronger, and her legacy is far from over. But the real question is whether the WNBA itself will to survive the storm it created. Because once you lose the trust of your fans, there may never be a second chance to earn it back.